Hello everyone. Let's start getting acquainted with Jerusalem-Sodom, according to the characteristics given to the city by Jesus Christ in Matthew 23:37. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones God's messengers. How often I have wanted to gather your children together, as a hen protects her chicks beneath her wings, but you wouldn't let me. Whom did Jesus Christ address with such bitter regret? It is clear that the literal buildings of the city of Jerusalem, made of wood and stone, could not heed his voice. Rather, Jesus desperately appealed to the government of Jehovah's people of the first century, living in Jerusalem and represented by leaders of various ranks. He grieved deeply for the hardness of their hearts. Earlier, Jesus had said, "It cannot be that a prophet would die outside of Jerusalem." Luke 13:33. This means that the leadership of Jehovah's people has always had something to do with the death of all Jehovah's prophets. Why? Let's look at it historically. When it was faithful to Jehovah, the ancient city of Jerusalem was represented by, firstly, faithful anointed priests, Jehovah's messengers, Malachi 2:4-7. Secondly, faithful anointed kings who helped organize the education of Jehovah's people, give fair judgment, and decide disputed cases. 2 Chronicles 17:7-9, 19:6-7. And lastly, the family heads and princes, Numbers 36:1. However, gradually, the faithful city became a harlot, as if she did not have a husband head. Due to idolatry, Jerusalem ceased to be the city of fair judgment and Jehovah's righteousness. Therefore, God called the rulers and prophets of corrupted Jerusalem by the name Sodom, Isaiah 1:10. Although all the leaders of Jerusalem-Sodom diligently performed all the ceremonies for the proper worship of God, Jehovah no longer accepted their efforts. They had to be corrected. Otherwise, not only the rulers, but also the entire people of Israel who became like Gomorrah through their fault could be punished. Therefore, God sent his prophets to Jerusalem-Sodom, to the corrupt rulers of God's people. For example, Jeremiah had to stand at the gates of Jerusalem and appeal for the prudence of the kings. Zephaniah went with an admonishment to the priests, princes, and prophets, speaking of them as defiled Jerusalem. Jerusalem-Sodom was told to wash the evil from its heart, because the spiritual well-being of Jehovah's people has always depended on the spirituality of the rulers. Under righteous rulers, the people followed the righteous path. Under wicked rulers, the entire people were involved in the sins of the ruler. However, instead of accepting the admonition, Jerusalem-Sodom persecuted and killed Jehovah's prophets. Why was the reaction to the admonition so inadequate? Because the words of the prophets were uncomfortable and unpleasant. The rulers would have had to accept correction and change their habitual way of life, but they did not want to do this. Therefore, it was easier for Jerusalem-Sodom to destroy the prophets of God and close their mouths than to accept the admonition, correct themselves, and turn to a righteous way of life. As a result, Jehovah punished Jerusalem, which did not want to turn back from its wrong course. The city was destroyed, the temple was burned, and the inhabitants were killed or taken into captivity to Babylon. A similar situation occurred in the days of Jesus Christ. Outwardly, Jerusalem fulfilled all the requirements of God's worship diligently. However, the leaders of Jehovah's people were again carried away by their own well-being rather than by the desire to have pity for people and be merciful. Although in general, Jehovah's people were taught the correct foundations of the truth of God, their teachers replaced some of the commandments of God with their own traditions for their own convenience. The judges of Jerusalem condemned the innocent, released the guilty, and urged the people to go against the righteousness of God. Therefore, Jesus also went to the rulers of Jehovah's people to seek and save the lost. He knew that, except for a few, this kind of leader, apostatized from God, would kill him in the same way as their ancestors had killed other prophets. Jehovah foresaw such resistance among the rulers this time as well. Indeed, throughout history, the wicked and adulterous generation has gradually but certainly come to power among Jehovah's people. This kind of ruler has always settled themselves comfortably in the truth and used their position, Jehovah's people, and the truth for their own purposes, violating Jehovah's principles. It was unprofitable for this wicked kind of ruler of God's people to recognize Christ as Jehovah's messenger, just as it was unprofitable for the previous ones governing Jerusalem-Sodom, which was punished by Babylon, to recognize Jehovah's prophets. Had they accepted Christ as Jehovah's messenger, they would have had to acknowledge the correctness of his reproving words, and their glowing reputation as the righteous would have been ruined. Therefore, this Jerusalem-Sodom of the 1st century AD also did not see in Jesus' reproof a chance to correct their wrong course and be saved, for they loved the glory of men more than the glory of God. As a result, Jesus, like all other prophets, was rejected and condemned to death. This Jerusalem-Sodom was also punished by Jehovah in 70 AD, this time not by Babylon, but by Rome, and not for a while, but forever. The city, along with its temple, were burned and razed to the ground. Many of the rulers were killed, and the survivors were sold into slavery. The Old Covenant era had ended. Now, the New Covenant era has been established, in which the rulers in the spiritual temple, in the congregations of Jehovah's new people, carry the responsibility of shepherding Jehovah's new people. And the tragedy of the governing Jerusalem-Sodom of Jehovah's people will be repeated. By the end of this age, the shepherd rulers of Jehovah's people, who sit in Jehovah's spiritual temple, will again gradually start doing something wrong. To see this for yourself, you might wish to open your Bible and read 2 Thessalonians 2:2-4. Once again, Jehovah will send his prophets with admonition, but they too will be killed on the streets of Jerusalem-Sodom, on the streets of the shepherd rulers of Jehovah's people, who have departed from him before the very end of this age. To observe the fulfillment of this prophecy, one must remain in the congregations of Jehovah's people and carefully analyze current events. Of course, it is sad to know that the Bible predicts that before Armageddon, the shepherds of Jehovah's people will deteriorate themselves and spoil many of Jehovah's servants. However, there is something that comforts and encourages Jehovah's people. This is the thought that every servant of Jehovah can remain faithful to God, regardless of whether or not Jerusalem of the rulers of Jehovah's people are faithful to him. The faithful Christians of the spiritually dead congregation in Sardis stood firm and did not leave their congregation. Therefore, it is possible for us, of our time, to not only stand firm, but also meet Jesus Christ in his millennium. We are sure of this. For the full version of this lesson, click on the link in the description below for the text version of this lesson. With love for all who seek the truth in the Bible, Jehovah's Witnesses.